The last bell rang at exactly 3:17 p.m., sharp and metallic, echoing through the corridors of Redwood Heights Community College Preparatory on the western edge of San Francisco. Students poured out in loose clusters, laughing, complaining, checking phones, eager to escape the building before the fog rolled in thicker than usual. Among them was Lena Whitmore, 19 years old, slim, dark-haired, her shoulders hunched as if she were bracing herself against more than just the cold. No one noticed anything unusual about her at first. That would come later, when everything ordinary about that afternoon would be dissected, slowed down, replayed frame by frame. Lena stepped through the front doors alone. She wasn't the kind of student teachers remembered fondly, nor the kind classmates sought out. She occupied a quieter category, troubled, but not loud about it. Present, but distant. Her record showed missed classes, heated arguments with staff, a short suspension the previous semester for disruptive conduct. Nothing criminal. Nothing that screamed this girl is about to vanish. Yet as she crossed the concrete steps and headed toward the bus stop on Hawthorne Street, something in her expression suggested finality. Not fear exactly. Resolve. The security cameras caught her in fragments. At 3:19 p.m., she paused near the bike racks, scrolling on her phone. At 3:21, she tucked the phone into her jacket pocket and glanced back toward the school entrance. At 3:22, she adjusted the strap of her worn black backpack and walked east instead of west, away from her usual route home. By 3:25, she was gone from view. 2 hours later, panic arrived like a storm breaking without warning. It began with a phone call from Marissa Whitmore, Lena's older sister, voice tight with irritation rather than fear. She had been asked to pick Lena up from the Powell Street bus terminal, something she did once or twice a week when their mother worked late. Lena wasn't answering her phone. Again. That part wasn't new. What was new was the silence that followed, calls going straight to voicemail, messages left unread. By early evening, irritation turned to concern. By nightfall, concern hardened into something uglier. At 9:42 p.m., Elaine Whitmore, Lena's mother, called the San Francisco Police Department to report her daughter missing. She told the dispatcher Lena had run off before, that she was difficult, emotionally unstable, and angry all the time. She said Lena had likely skipped town with friends or met someone online. Her voice cracked in the right places, but not enough to disguise the edge of frustration underneath. She doesn't listen, Elaine said. She never has. Officers noted the comment but said little. Families spoke like that sometimes under stress. It didn't mean anything. Not yet. The official timeline began forming almost immediately. Lena was last seen leaving school at 3:17 p.m. She was supposed to go straight home. She didn't. According to her family, she had been acting erratic for weeks, locking herself in her room, refusing therapy appointments, accusing them of controlling her life. The implication was clear: Lena had chosen to disappear. The media would echo that narrative within 24 hours. But earlier that afternoon, before the last bell, before the cameras, before the phone calls and police reports, Lena had done something she had never done before. She had asked her guidance counselor a question. Not about credits. Not about college transfers. About legal emancipation. The counselor, caught off guard, had advised her to schedule a longer meeting, maybe bring a parent. Lena had smiled tightly and said, "That won't be necessary." Then she'd stood up, thanked her politely, and walked out as if the decision had already been made. No one connected that moment to her disappearance until much later. That night, Elaine and Marissa sat in the Whitmore living room, the television flickering with muted news coverage of a missing young woman whose photograph looked both familiar and strangely distant. Lena's face stared out from the screen, school ID photo, neutral expression, eyes unreadable. Marissa paced, chewing at her thumbnail. Elaine sat rigid on the couch, arms folded, her phone face down beside her as if it were something dangerous. "She's doing this to punish us," Marissa said finally. "You know that, right?" Elaine nodded once. "She wants attention." Outside, fog pressed against the windows, thick and unyielding. Somewhere across the city, buses hissed to a stop, doors opening and closing, passengers stepping off into the cold. Cameras recorded everything they were meant to record: streets, sidewalks, storefronts, faces. Everything except intent. By midnight, search alerts were circulating online. By morning, flyers would appear on lampposts and cafe windows. By the end of the week, thousands of strangers would feel they knew Lena Whitmore, her troubled past, her unstable behavior, her pattern of defiance. What no one realized yet was that the most important part of the story wasn't where Lena had gone. It was why she hadn't come back. And the answer, buried in a few seconds of overlooked footage in a family story told too quickly, was already waiting, silent, undeniable, and ready to turn everything upside down. By morning, the city had decided who Lena Whitmore was. Her face appeared on screens before coffee had finished brewing, local news, community alerts, social feeds amplified by anxious shares. The photograph was the same everywhere: neutral background, hair pulled back, eyes steady but distant. The caption beneath it was careful, almost rehearsed. 19-year-old student missing. Last seen leaving school. The story traveled fast, but the details traveled selectively. Inside the Whitmore apartment in the outer Sunset, panic performed itself in stages. Elaine Whitmore had not slept. She answered the door to reporters with swollen eyes and trembling hands, wrapped in a cardigan she kept tugging tighter around her body. Marissa stood just behind her, arms crossed, jaw clenched, playing the role of the protective sister. When the first camera light blinked on, Elaine inhaled sharply and let the tears come. "My daughter is vulnerable," she said, voice cracking at exactly the right moment. "She struggles. She doesn't always make good choices. We just want her home safe." The phrasing mattered. Vulnerable. Struggles. Choices. Each word gently shifted responsibility away from the family and onto Lena herself. The reporters nodded sympathetically, scribbling notes. The story, already forming, hardened. Within hours, speculation bloomed. Online comments filled with armchair diagnoses. Some blamed social media. Others blamed mental health systems, the city, the school. A few asked uncomfortable questions about the family, but those were drowned out by louder voices repeating what Elaine had said on camera: Lena was troubled. Lena was unpredictable. Lena might have run away. Marissa leaned into that narrative with unsettling ease. "She's threatened to disappear before," she told one journalist, shaking her head as if exhausted by years of worry. "She likes control. This is how she takes it." What Marissa did not say was how often Lena had accused them of the same thing. Police arrived mid-morning to conduct a formal interview. 2 officers sat at the dining table while Elaine recounted the weeks leading up to Lena's disappearance. She described slammed doors, arguments over curfews, accusations of surveillance that she dismissed as paranoia. "She thinks we're against her," Elaine said. "But we've done everything to help her." One officer asked about Lena's phone. Another asked about her laptop. Elaine hesitated just a fraction too long before answering. "She took her phone when she left for school," she said. "The laptop stays here." Marissa stood up abruptly and went to the kitchen, claiming she needed water. The officers exchanged a look but continued. The missing persons report expanded quickly, bank accounts untouched, no rideshare activity, no recent withdrawals. Lena had not taken clothes or personal items beyond what was in her backpack. That detail unsettled the officers more than they let on. Runaways, even impulsive ones, usually plan better. By afternoon, volunteers gathered near the school, combing streets and parks with flyers. Elaine appeared briefly, tearfully thanking them, then returned home, citing exhaustion. Marissa stayed, directing people with an air of authority that struck some as odd. "She's very composed," one volunteer whispered to another. "If it were my sister." That sentence never finished. As evening approached, a tip line call came in. A cafe owner near Market Street reported seeing a young woman matching Lena's description arguing with an older man the previous afternoon. The description was vague. The man was never identified. But the rumors spread quickly, morphing online into something darker, more sensational. Elaine seized on it. "See," she told police. "She gets involved with people. We warned her." The family's fear, real or rehearsed, had begun to shape the investigation's direction. Yet even as the narrative solidified publicly, small inconsistencies flickered beneath the surface. Neighbors mentioned frequent shouting from the Whitmore apartment. A former friend of Lena's contacted police anonymously, claiming Lena had been trying to get out of the house for months. The message was logged but not prioritized. The cameras had not been reviewed yet. Not thoroughly. That would come later. That night, a candlelight vigil was held outside the school. Elaine stood at the center, hands clasped, head bowed, surrounded by strangers offering sympathy. When asked to speak, she stepped forward and delivered a carefully measured plea. "Lena, if you're watching this," she said, voice trembling, "please come home. We forgive you. We just want to help." The word forgive hung in the cold air, strange and heavy. Marissa watched from behind, her expression unreadable in the candlelight. Somewhere across the city, traffic cameras continued their endless recording. Transit footage archived itself without emotion. Every second of that afternoon existed, preserved and waiting. And while the Whitmore family's panic convinced most of the city, the truth remained untouched by tears, untouched by interviews, untouched by the story everyone seemed eager to believe. The family said Lena had chosen to disappear. But the evidence, quietly accumulating beyond their control, was already beginning to suggest something far more uncomfortable. Because panic, when examined closely, has a way of revealing what fear alone cannot. And the Whitmores were afraid, for reasons that had nothing to do with not knowing where Lena was. The phrase troubled teen appeared so often in the first week after Lena Whitmore vanished that it began to feel less like a description and more like a verdict. It was repeated by anchors, typed into headlines, murmured by neighbors who had never spoken to her. By the time investigators started digging into Lena's past, the conclusion seemed predetermined. She was unstable, rebellious, unpredictable. A young woman capable of disappearing simply because she wanted to. But records, unlike rumors, tell stories slowly, and not always the ones people expect. Lena's school file was thick, but not damning. There were reports of verbal altercations with instructors, skipped counseling sessions, and a formal complaint filed against her for disruptive behavior during a group seminar. The incident report described Lena as agitated and defensive, refusing to back down when challenged by a faculty advisor. What the report did not include was the reason she had been upset. The advisor had contacted her mother without her consent, discussing Lena's academic standing and mental health concerns. Lena had erupted in class the next day. To the administration, it looked like defiance. To Lena, it felt like betrayal. Her attendance record showed frequent absences, but not in clusters that suggested recklessness. More like avoidance. Mondays were especially bad. Fridays, too. She did better midweek, when her schedule kept her out of the apartment for longer stretches. A professor noted in a private email that Lena's work, when submitted, was exceptionally perceptive, if emotionally raw. At 19, Lena had already outgrown the label her family clung to. She wasn't skipping school to party. She wasn't abusing substances. Drug tests administered after her earlier suspension came back clean. What she was doing, quietly and consistently, was pushing against a life that felt increasingly sealed shut. Investigators interviewed people who had known her before the story hardened around her. A former classmate described Lena as intense, but not crazy. A neighbor recalled seeing her sitting on the apartment steps late at night, headphones on, staring at the street as if watching for something, or someone. A part-time coworker from a bookstore she'd briefly worked at said Lena quit abruptly after her mother began calling the store to ask about her shifts. She was embarrassed, the coworker said. She kept saying, "I'm not a child." The family framed these moments as evidence of instability. Police began to see them differently. Lena's medical records, accessed with proper authorization, showed a history of anxiety and situational depression. Nothing severe enough to warrant hospitalization. No suicide attempts. No psychotic episodes. Yet her mother had repeatedly requested wellness checks, sometimes after arguments that ended with Lena locking herself in her room. Each request painted Lena as a danger to herself. Each one also reinforced Elaine's control. One detective noticed a pattern: whenever Lena asserted independence, asking about moving out, changing her major, limiting family access, there was an escalation. A call to a counselor. A call to campus security. A call to police. Always framed as concern. Always documented. Friends from Lena's earlier years told a similar story. She had once been close with a small group from high school, but relationships frayed after Elaine began monitoring her phone and social media accounts well into adulthood. She stopped trusting people, one friend said. She thought anything she said would get back to her family. That fear, it turned out, wasn't unfounded. A search of Lena's phone records revealed that Marissa had access to her location sharing until just weeks before the disappearance. The feature had been disabled after a late-night argument, one that ended with Marissa accusing Lena of acting like a victim and Lena shouting back that she was done being watched. The argument was confirmed by a neighbor who had overheard it through thin apartment walls. What emerged was not the portrait of a reckless runaway, but of a young woman tightening her circle, choosing her words carefully, preparing for something she wasn't ready to explain to anyone. Even the accusations of erratic behavior began to crumble under scrutiny. Lena hadn't been isolating randomly. She had been journaling extensively, filling notebooks with plans, lists, and reflections. One entry, found in her backpack after it was eventually recovered weeks later, read simply, "Independence is not abandonment." The family called it obsession. Investigators called it intention. Elaine insisted Lena was incapable of surviving on her own. Yet bank records showed Lena had quietly saved money from part-time work, small amounts withdrawn and then deposited again, as if practicing restraint. She had researched housing assistance programs and legal aid clinics in San Francisco, browsing them late at night when the apartment was quiet. None of this aligned with the family's version of events. And then there were the therapy notes. Lena had stopped attending sessions 3 months before she vanished. Elaine told police it was because Lena refused help. But the therapist's file told a different story. Lena had requested that sessions remain confidential. Elaine had demanded updates. When the therapist refused, citing Lena's age and consent, Elaine had withdrawn permission for Lena to continue using the family insurance. Lena hadn't quit therapy. She had been cut off. By the end of the week, the phrase troubled teen began to sound hollow to the detectives assigned to the case. Troubled, yes, but not in the way the public had been led to believe. The trouble hadn't followed Lena out of the school building that afternoon. It had been waiting for her at home. And as investigators prepared to finally review the CCTV footage in full, one unsettling realization settled in: if Lena had disappeared by choice, she had been planning it carefully. But if she hadn't, then everything the family had said, every tearful plea, every claim of concern, would need to be examined under a far harsher light. Either way, the past was no longer something to gloss over. It was the key to understanding why Lena Whitmore had walked away from her life, or why someone else might have made that decision for her. By the time investigators requested the footage, the narrative had already calcified in the public mind. Lena Whitmore was unstable. Lena Whitmore had run away. The cameras, most people assumed, would simply confirm what everyone thought they already knew. They did not. The first files arrived from Redwood Heights Community College Preparatory late on a Thursday afternoon. Grainy but serviceable. Time-stamped. Silent. Dozens of students drifting through hallways and exits, each one a brief life intersecting with another. Detectives sat shoulder to shoulder in a dim conference room, watching the last day of Lena's visibility unfold second by second. At 3:17 p.m., the final bell rang. Lena appeared on screen less than 30 seconds later, pushing through the front doors with the same black backpack she'd carried all semester. Her posture was stiff, her pace measured. Not hurried. Not hesitant. She did not look like someone in the middle of a crisis. At 3:18, she stopped near the steps and pulled out her phone. They paused the footage. Her thumbs moved quickly. Not the frantic tapping of distress, but deliberate typing. One detective zoomed in as far as the resolution allowed. They could not see the message content, but they could see the rhythm: send, pause, wait. Another message followed, then nothing. Lena waited. At 3:19, she glanced back toward the school entrance. Not over her shoulder, not nervously, just a quick, purposeful look. As if checking whether someone was watching. Or waiting. At 3:21, she adjusted her backpack strap, squared her shoulders, and walked away from the camera's view. The next clip came from a municipal camera on Hawthorne Street. The timestamp showed 3:23 p.m. Lena entered the frame from the left, moving toward the bus stop. This was where the family claimed she should have waited for public transit. She didn't. Instead, Lena slowed, stopped, and stepped out of line with the other commuters. She checked her phone once more, then turned and walked east, against traffic, against habit, against the routine her family insisted she followed. "Pull up the traffic cam at 3rd and Hawthorne," one detective said. The angle was wider there, less flattering. Cars slid through the intersection. Pedestrians crossed in clusters. Lena appeared at the edge of the frame, walking with new purpose now, head up, pace quickened. At 3:25, she disappeared behind a delivery truck and did not re-emerge. That was supposed to be the end of it. But it wasn't. A junior analyst, tasked with reviewing peripheral footage from nearby businesses, flagged something unusual. A camera mounted above a small pharmacy captured part of the sidewalk at 3:26 p.m. Lena entered frame briefly, then stopped. She wasn't alone. The image was blurry, but clear enough to make out a second figure approaching from the opposite direction. Older. Taller. The person slowed as Lena slowed. They exchanged a few words. No audio, no gestures dramatic enough to suggest conflict. Just a conversation that lasted exactly 12 seconds. Then Lena stepped back. The other figure did not follow. Instead, Lena turned sharply, crossed the street mid-block, and walked out of frame with urgency that had not been there moments before. The room went quiet. This was not the behavior of someone meeting a trusted friend. Nor was it the frantic flight of someone in immediate danger. It looked like recognition, followed by decision. Detectives replayed the 12 seconds over and over. "Who is that?" someone asked. No one had an answer. The family was called in the next morning to review selected stills. Elaine leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Marissa crossed her arms tightly. "Do you recognize this person?" an officer asked. Elaine shook her head too quickly. "No." Marissa hesitated. "Just a breath. Just long enough to be noticed." "It's hard to tell," she said. "The footage is so blurry." But something else in the footage unsettled investigators more than the unidentified figure. Lena never looked panicked. Her face, though indistinct, showed concentration, not fear. Her movements were controlled. Even when she changed direction abruptly, it wasn't chaotic. It was intentional. Then came the transit footage. At 3:41 p.m., Lena appeared on a bus camera 10 blocks from where she was supposed to be. She paid in cash. She sat near the back. She did not look at her phone again. This detail contradicted everything the family had told police. They insisted Lena never carried cash. That she relied on family-controlled cards. That she couldn't manage logistics on her own. Yet here she was, doing exactly that. The final clip came from a private garage camera near Mission Street at 3:58 p.m. Lena walked past the entrance, slowed, and looked directly at the camera. For a fraction of a second, her face was clear. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid. She looked resolved. When the footage ended, no one spoke for several seconds. The cameras had not shown a girl being lured, chased, or abducted. They also had not shown a reckless runaway spiraling out of control. They had shown a young woman navigating something complex, something she had anticipated. And they had revealed one undeniable truth: the story the Whitmore family had been telling did not align with what the city's silent witnesses had captured. Cameras don't lie. But they do raise questions. And the biggest one, now impossible to ignore, was this: if Lena Whitmore hadn't vanished impulsively, and she hadn't been forced, then who, or what, had she been preparing to escape? The answer, investigators suspected, was closer to home than anyone wanted to admit. The footage changed everything, but not all at once. Publicly, the Whitmore family doubled down. Elaine repeated the same phrases in every interview, her voice frayed but steady: "Lena is fragile. Lena makes impulsive decisions. Lena needs help." Marissa echoed her, nodding solemnly beside her mother like punctuation. To the outside world, their story remained intact, barely. Behind closed doors, it began to splinter. Detectives returned to the Whitmore apartment with sharper questions and fewer reassurances. This time, they didn't ask how Lena felt. They asked what Lena knew. What was she afraid of? One detective asked. Elaine frowned, visibly irritated. She wasn't afraid. She was dramatic. Of what? The detective pressed. Elaine's lips tightened. Of growing up, I suppose. Marissa shifted in her seat. Investigators laid out still images from the CCTV footage on the dining table: the unidentified figure, Lena changing direction, the bus ride paid in cash. Each photo contradicted something the family had previously stated. "You said Lena never carried cash," an officer said, tapping the image. yet she paid fare at 3:41 p.m. Elaine stared at the photo, then looked away. She must have stolen it. The word hung in the air, sharp and unnecessary. From whom? The officer asked calmly. Elaine didn't answer. The detectives noticed how often Marissa spoke for her mother, and how often Elaine deferred once pressed. The roles were not what they seemed. Elaine was the emotional face. Marissa was the enforcer. A digital forensic review deepened the unease. Lena's laptop, recovered from her bedroom, told a story the family hadn't mentioned. Browser history showed searches for tenant rights, legal aid clinics, and protective orders. Draft emails, never sent, were saved in a private folder, addressed to professors, employers, and one unsent message to a legal advocacy group. The subject line read, "Request for confidential consultation." When asked about the emails, Elaine waved them off. She was being dramatic. She thought we were controlling her. The detective looked up. "Were you?" Elaine bristled. "We're her family." That answer, investigators noted, didn't actually address the question. Then came the phones. Marissa's phone records showed frequent contact with Lena in the days leading up to the disappearance, far more than she had admitted. Long calls late at night. Texts that escalated in tone. One message, recovered from Lena's cloud backup, read simply, "If you leave, don't come back." Marissa claimed it was said in the heat of the moment. But the timestamp, 2:12 a.m., 2 days before Lena vanished, suggested something colder, more deliberate. A neighbor's testimony added weight. She described hearing shouting the night before Lena disappeared, louder than usual. A male voice was present, something the family hadn't mentioned. "Sounded like an argument about money," the neighbor said. And someone yelling that Lena owed them. Elaine denied anyone else had been there. The tension in the room thickened. Police began to examine Marissa's role more closely. At 27, she lived in the apartment rent-free, worked intermittently, and handled many household logistics. She had access to Elaine's accounts. She also had access to Lena's personal information, including school schedules and phone passwords. One officer noted quietly that Marissa's alibi for the afternoon of Lena's disappearance was thin, unverified errands, vague timelines. When confronted, Marissa snapped. "Are you accusing me of something?" she demanded. "No," the detective replied evenly. "We're asking questions." "Well, ask better ones," Marissa shot back. "Lena wanted to disappear. She's always wanted to make us look like monsters." That statement marked a turning point. Families searching for missing loved ones rarely frame themselves as victims of the person who vanished. The bitterness beneath Marissa's words startled even seasoned investigators. The cracks widened when bank records revealed a small but telling transaction. 2 days after Lena vanished, Elaine transferred money out of a joint account she shared with Lena, an account the family claimed they hadn't touched in months. When asked why, Elaine said she was protecting funds in case Lena made reckless decisions. The detective's pen paused mid-note. "Protecting funds," he repeated. "From your missing daughter." The story was no longer holding. Investigators revisited the unidentified figure from the footage, cross-referencing height, build, and gait with known associates. One match rose uncomfortably to the top, a family acquaintance who had provided financial advice to Elaine in the past. A man who had been around the apartment often enough for neighbors to recognize him, but whose name had never been volunteered. When Elaine was shown the comparison images, she went pale. "I didn't think he mattered," she said quietly. That was the first honest thing she'd said all day. As the interview ended, one detective stayed behind, surveying the apartment. The framed family photos. Lena always positioned slightly apart. The locks on bedroom doors. The faint outline where something heavy had once hung on the wall. This wasn't just a house where a young woman had lived. It was a house she had been trying to leave. And as investigators stepped back into the fog-laced street, one unsettling conclusion solidified: the Whitmore family's panic wasn't born from not knowing where Lena was. It was born from knowing far too much, and realizing, too late, that the truth was slipping beyond their control. The case stopped being about a missing girl the moment investigators uncovered what Lena Whitmore had been quietly threatening to expose. It began with a password. For weeks, Lena's cloud storage had been partially inaccessible: encrypted folders, locked notes, audio files mislabeled as class recordings. A digital forensics specialist finally cracked one folder late one evening, expecting journal entries or drafts of goodbye letters. What they found instead shifted the case into something far more dangerous. There were recordings. Not dramatic confrontations or emotional confessions, but methodical, carefully hidden audio files. Conversations captured late at night. Voices lowered. Tension thick enough to feel even without sound. Lena's voice appeared rarely, mostly asking questions. The other voices, adult, confident, dismissive, did most of the talking. One voice belonged unmistakably to Marissa. Another belonged to the unidentified family acquaintance from the CCTV comparison. And in the background, sometimes barely audible, was Elaine. The recordings revealed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Money had been disappearing from accounts tied to Lena's name for over a year, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Funds from scholarships. Refunds from tuition overpayments. A short-term educational grant Lena hadn't even known she qualified for. All legally hers. All quietly redirected. In one recording, Marissa laughed softly and said, "She won't notice. She doesn't even understand how this stuff works." In another, Elaine's voice trembled, not with guilt, but fear. "If she finds out, she'll destroy this family." That was the moment detectives stopped treating Lena as a troubled young adult and started treating her as a liability. The family acquaintance, now officially identified as Thomas Reeve, 48, was brought in for questioning. He had no criminal record worth mentioning. He wore tailored suits and spoke with the calm authority of someone accustomed to being believed. He described himself as a financial consultant helping Elaine manage household stress. When asked about Lena, he smiled thinly. "She was confused," he said. "She misunderstood adult responsibilities." That smile vanished when detectives played the audio. In one clip, Reeve warned Elaine that Lena was getting too curious. In another, he suggested freezing accounts, tightening control, until she settles down or moves on. Moves on. The phrase landed like a confession. The scandal broke internally before it ever reached the press. A vulnerable young woman's finances had been exploited by the people responsible for protecting her. Her attempts to assert independence had been reframed as instability. Her resistance documented as evidence against her. And when she began asking the wrong questions, the pressure escalated. Investigators pieced together Lena's final weeks with chilling clarity. She had discovered irregularities in her accounts. She had confronted Marissa first. The argument the neighbor overheard now made sense: money, control, betrayal. Then Lena had gone to Elaine. The confrontation, according to an audio file dated 4 days before the disappearance, was explosive. "You don't get to decide my life," Lena said, her voice steady but shaking. "You stole from me." Elaine cried. Marissa shouted. Reeve's voice cut through both. "You need to think about consequences," he said calmly. You don't want to ruin your future over misunderstandings. That word again. Misunderstandings. By the time Lena walked out of school on that fog-heavy afternoon, she wasn't just leaving class. She was stepping away from a system designed to keep her dependent. The unidentified encounter on the sidewalk now took on new meaning. Investigators matched the figure's build and gait conclusively to Reeve. He had been near the school that day, claiming he was running errands. The 12-second conversation wasn't a coincidence. It was a warning. Phone metadata revealed Lena had messaged someone minutes before leaving campus, not a friend, but a legal advocacy hotline. The message was brief: "I'm not safe at home. I need advice." She never got a reply. When detectives confronted Elaine with the recordings, the facade collapsed. Her panic dissolved into defensiveness, then bitterness. "She was ungrateful," Elaine said through clenched teeth. "After everything we did for her." Marissa was worse. "She was going to ruin us," she snapped. "Do you know what people would think?" She didn't care. Not once did either woman say they were sorry. The case shifted rapidly. What had begun as a missing person investigation became a financial exploitation inquiry, then something darker still. Lena hadn't just been trying to leave, she had been preparing to expose a quiet, systemic abuse hiding behind concern and therapy appointments. The most unsettling question now loomed over everything: had Lena left on her own, or had she been pushed into silence? Reeve denied threatening her. Elaine denied knowing the full extent of the financial manipulation. Marissa blamed everyone but herself. Yet the evidence told a different story. By the end of the week, arrests were being discussed internally. Warrants drafted. Press statements prepared but not yet released. The department moved carefully, knowing the public backlash would be explosive. Because this wasn't just a family secret. It was a scandal, one that revealed how easily control could be disguised as care, and how quickly a young woman's voice could be dismissed once she stopped playing the role assigned to her. And somewhere beyond the reach of cameras and recordings, Lena Whitmore remained unseen. But now, for the first time since she vanished, investigators weren't asking where she had gone. They were asking whether she had escaped just in time, or whether the truth had cost her everything. For nearly 3 weeks, the question had haunted everyone involved in the case: where's Lena Whitmore? Then, without warning, the question changed. It wasn't asked by police, or journalists, or even the Whitmore family. It was asked by a clerk at a small legal aid office 2 counties north of San Francisco. The call came in at 8:14 a.m. on a Monday, routed through a supervisor who had been quietly alerted days earlier that the name Lena Whitmore might surface. When the clerk spoke, her voice trembled, not with fear, but disbelief. "We think," she said carefully, "that she walked in here 2 days ago." At first, investigators assumed a false lead. They had dozens by now. Sightings in Oakland. Tips from Los Angeles. A blurry photo from a bus station that turned out to be someone else entirely. Hope had become dangerous, something they handled with gloves. But this time, there were details only Lena could have known. The young woman who entered the office hadn't asked for money or housing. She asked one question, calmly and precisely. What protections exist for adults whose families have committed financial abuse and misrepresentation in their name? She had used a different surname. But she had brought documentation. Scholarship letters. Bank statements. A handwritten timeline outlining when funds began disappearing. And most importantly, a flash drive. The flash drive contained copies of the same recordings police had uncovered, plus others they had never seen. Including one recorded the night before Lena vanished. The office supervisor contacted authorities immediately, but by then, Lena was already gone. Again. This time, intentionally. When detectives reviewed the new audio, the room fell silent. In the recording, Lena's voice was calm, unnervingly so. "I'm not going to fight you anymore," she said. "I'm leaving." Marissa laughed bitterly. "You won't last a week." Then Reeves spoke, his tone low and threatening. "If you walk out like this, you lose everything. Your accounts. Your name. Your credibility." There was a pause. Then Lena replied, softly, "You already took those." The twist wasn't that Lena had survived. It was that she had orchestrated her disappearance. Not as an act of escape alone, but as leverage. Investigators pieced it together rapidly. Lena had realized that as long as she stayed visible, her family controlled the narrative. Every attempt to assert herself had been reframed as instability. Every protest used against her. So she made herself unavailable. She left just enough evidence to draw attention. Just enough contradictions to invite scrutiny. And she disappeared long enough for investigators to dig without her family interfering. The legal aid office confirmed she never intended to stay. She had asked what she needed to know, left copies of evidence, and vanished again, this time with strategy, not desperation. When police finally confronted Elaine and Marissa with this development, the reaction was explosive. Elaine broke down, not in grief, but rage. "She planned this," she cried. "She made us look like criminals." Marissa was worse. "She manipulated everyone," she spat. "She wanted revenge." The detective didn't raise his voice. "No," he said. "She wanted freedom." The scandal went public the next day. Headlines flipped overnight. The same outlets that had labeled Lena a runaway now questioned the family's conduct. Financial abuse. Coercive control. Exploitation of a dependent adult. The phrase troubled teen disappeared, replaced by something far more damning. Calculated silence. Public sympathy shifted with brutal speed. Online comments turned vicious, not toward Lena, but toward Elaine and Marissa. Old interviews were replayed, scrutinized. The word "forgive" from the candlelight vigil became infamous. Body language experts dissected Marissa's defensiveness frame by frame. And then came the warrants. Elaine was charged first, for misappropriation of funds and falsifying financial disclosures. Marissa followed, accused of coercion and conspiracy. Reeves' arrest was quieter, more procedural, but the charges against him were the most severe. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why hadn't Lena stayed? The answer came in a final message, delivered through her attorney to law enforcement only. "I am safe," it read. "I will not reveal my location." My disappearance was not a cry for help, it was a boundary. Please stop looking for me as a missing person. Start looking at why leaving was my only option. The public reaction was divided. Some called her brave. Others called her deceptive. A few accused her of cruelty for letting people believe she was in danger. But those who had listened closely, really listened, understood the truth. Lena hadn't vanished because she was lost. She vanished because staying had been more dangerous than leaving. And the final twist, the one no one had anticipated, was this. The case that began as a search for a missing girl ended as a reckoning. Not with her absence, but with her refusal to be controlled ever again. The morning after the arrests, the Whitmore apartment felt like a crime scene even though no one had been hurt there physically. Police had left temporary evidence markers, and reporters lined the street outside, cameras rolling, microphones poised. Inside, it was eerily quiet. The chaos of lies, manipulation, and betrayal had finally been exposed, but the damage was permanent. Elaine Whitmore sat on the living room couch, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking. Marissa stood by the window, staring at the fog rolling in off the Pacific, silent for once. Neither spoke. The words had already come out. The scandal was public, documented, undeniable. Their carefully curated story of a troubled daughter had evaporated under the cold light of truth. For police, the case had changed shape yet again. Lena was no longer a missing minor in danger of exploitation. She was a 19-year-old adult who had made her own decisions, brave, calculated, and deliberate. The investigation shifted from searching for her to protecting her and ensuring that Elaine, Marissa, and Reeve faced the consequences of their actions. Evidence collected from bank records, emails, and recordings was damning. Funds that belonged to Lena had been siphoned repeatedly. Marissa had actively monitored her sister's communications and accounts. Reeve's role as a financial consultant was no more than a legal veneer for coercion and exploitation. And Elaine, the matriarch, had maintained the pretense of maternal concern while facilitating and benefiting from the scheme. The press had a field day. Headlines screamed, "Family Betrayal, Missing Teens Financial Exploitation Exposed," and "San Francisco Scandal, Teen Vanishes, Family Lies." Social media exploded. The public debated endlessly, was Lena manipulative, or was she a victim? Could a young adult be entirely justified in disappearing from her family, leaving them exposed? The discussion became heated, polarizing communities, and reshaping public opinion about family loyalty, independence, and autonomy. But for the detectives, the case wasn't over. The unanswered question remained, where exactly was Lena? She had vanished into a network of her own design, safe houses, legal advocates, and trusted friends who understood the magnitude of what she had uncovered. She was untraceable, unassailable. Every lead investigators pursued ended in carefully erased digital footprints. Lena had calculated every step, anticipating surveillance, anticipating police work, anticipating the media. In the department, there was admiration for her intelligence, even as there was frustration. She had been silent, yet her silence spoke volumes. It forced the authorities to examine not just what had happened, but why it had been allowed to happen in the first place. For Elaine and Marissa, consequences were immediate. Their accounts were frozen. Access to financial resources restricted. Legal proceedings moved quickly, but the court of public opinion had already delivered its verdict. Friends and neighbors who once sympathized now whispered about betrayal and deceit. Colleagues at work avoided them. Social media shamed them endlessly. Their lives, carefully constructed around appearances, were unraveling. Reeve faced criminal charges as well, though he attempted to maintain his composure in interviews. Legal consultants cautioned him against public statements, warning that every word would be used in court. His reputation, carefully maintained over decades, disintegrated in hours. Meanwhile, Lena remained an enigma. Those who had glimpsed her after she vanished reported a calm, resolute presence, almost unnervingly mature for someone her age. She had anticipated that vanishing would be misunderstood as vulnerability, and she leveraged it to reveal the truth behind a family narrative built on control, fear, and deceit. The scandal sparked public debates across the country. Commentators discussed financial abuse, coercive control, and adult autonomy in ways they rarely had before. Legal experts weighed in on the implications for young adults under parental financial influence. Psychologists analyzed the impact of family betrayal on mental health and independence. Social media users shared similar stories of being silenced, controlled, or manipulated by family members, and of taking extreme steps to protect themselves. And yet, for Lena, the conversation mattered little. She had no intention of reuniting with a family that had stolen from her, misrepresented her, and attempted to silence her. She had acted to protect herself. She had acted to reclaim what was hers. And she had acted with foresight, ensuring that her story could be told without her needing to be present. As the weeks passed, police filed the last of their reports and closed the case for public purposes. Elaine and Marissa faced formal hearings. Reeve awaited trial. The Whitmore family name, once ordinary and unremarkable, became synonymous with betrayal and scandal in San Francisco. The city moved on, as cities do, but Lena's story lingered in the minds of everyone who followed it. It was a story of courage, of quiet rebellion, and of justice achieved in unconventional ways. It was a reminder that appearances could deceive, that fear and control often masquerade as care, and that those who are underestimated can be the most capable of reclaiming their power. And somewhere in the fog-drenched streets of Northern California, Lena Whitmore began the next chapter of her life, unseen, independent, and finally free. The cameras had not captured her final steps. The public did not know her location. But she had won in the most complete way possible, by rewriting the narrative, reclaiming her autonomy, and exposing the truth that no amount of family loyalty or public sympathy could hide. In the end, the story was not about disappearance. It was about survival, resilience, and the uncompromising pursuit of justice on one's own terms. Lena had vanished, but she had done so not as a victim. She had vanished as the architect of her own liberation. And in that silence, she had said more than any words ever could.